Jodi, I'd love to hear your views on what it means to take ownership of your own career and development and some of your insights on that topic.
Sure, and actually I just want to expand on Cherie's point because, you know, I've observed we have some lawyers that are just naturals, they know what to do, they are able to lead a group. But we were, like many firms, struggling with our key client team initiative. And what we really fundamentally got down to was, once they had a group, they didn't know what they were supposed to do with it, even down to, running a meeting and coordinating a group effort. So it's definitely something that is still an area of opportunity. But what I wanted to talk about, because I mean, most of us are not necessarily in a position to influence that. I mean, you can through persuasion and certainly discussions with different people. But for most of us, in business development and marketing, the focus is more on our teams, working with our people. So one of the things that I thought I would share with you is what you can do yourself, because professional development is it's not like your manager can just develop you. They can't do it for you, so it is a two-way street, and there's some very systematic things that you can do. So a tool that I had been introduced to, which I find very helpful, is creating a professional development action plan. Let me just ask, who has annual reviews? Can you just put your hand up if you have an annual review process at your firm? So a lot, but not as many as I would have thought. Does anyone have 360-degree type feedback performance assessments? Okay, some do. So the start, I would encourage the starting place is, if you have an annual review, that often there are things in there, and I'm presuming that you're all star performers and you're all fabulous, but there's always going to be areas where you can stretch and develop, and usually the annual review process will help to pull those things out. And none of us enjoy getting a review. None of us, I personally, I don't like hearing anything other than I'm absolutely perfect. But I've learned.
Jodi, you're absolutely perfect.
Thank you. But I've learned to see those things more of a gift, and believe me, it took me years to get to that place. But see those things as this is someone has taken the time to think through what might be important for me to develop. And if you look at it that way, it's a very different sort of approach. Because honestly, I don't think most managers are not vindictive or nasty or there may be exceptions, but most of the time people are just looking at where is there a gap and what is it that the person could do to be able to perform even at a better level. So the tool that I would, and there's an action planning form on each of the tables. The idea is that something like your annual assessment, you pull out anything that looks like, okay, here's something that I could develop. And you explicitly, because a lot of us read the annual review, have the discussion, and then that's it. Try and forget about it at least for another 12 months. But with the action planning thing, you pull those things out, you specify each of the different development areas, and then you think about, well, what is it that I could do in order to develop that skill? So, just take an easy one. If someone highlighted that you needed to develop presentation skills, specific actions might be that you go and do a course, but that's just one piece. You may also, set a goal to say, okay, 5 times this year, I'm going to go out and make sure that I do a presentation. And that could just be a presentation to your team, it could be a presentation to some lawyers, but finding what, places and times that you could actually cultivate that skill. So you do that for each of the competencies. You also want to look at, what's in the way, why wouldn't I be able to do this, so that you can overcome any impediments. So the big thing is looking at resources, looking at specific things that you can do. And then, really, I've known, and this is certainly consultants that take this very seriously, I've known consultants that put it in a spreadsheet and they will once a month go through and review and, treat it like, it's not your job and it's not the performance of the work, but it's this separate component of these are the things that I need to do. And for folks that, if you don't, well, actually, even if you've got an annual review, but if you don't have any sort of annual assessment, I would encourage you to go out and actually solicit feedback from people, because if you do that, it's hard to do because you don't really want to hear whatever it is that people might suggest. But if you do, people they see that you're committed and that you want to develop, and really people actually do like to help, and so it's a way of and I would encourage choose 3 or 4 people to go out and actually talk to, and maybe just a couple of times a year. As a minimum once a year, you want to go out and and the conversation might be, what could I do better? Where do you see me needing to grow? So that's the action planning.
If I can add just one thing, you mentioned about the 360 feedback, and you asked about horror stories. So here's a horror story around 360 feedback, which was at a firm retreat. They brought a consultant in to do a 360 feedback fishbowl of the managing partners. And within 10 minutes, they pulled the consultant out and said, if you keep going, you're going to destroy the partnership. And so you got to be careful with this stuff and how you use these tools. They're great tools, but you've got to use them in a way that's going to work.
Those of you that know me know that I'm a perpetual list maker. I am very goal-oriented. I like to check things off. I was having a conversation over the weekend with one of my closest friends who's like-minded, and we were talking about our respective lists, and he is to the nth degree what these goals look like and the literal steps. And he actually puts on his daily list brush teeth. That's how self-reward motivated he is. He wants to be able to check off everything. So, I tend to think of the goal, it's a linear thing, it's almost two-dimensional, but as we all know, there's multiple layers to this, and it's really a three-dimensional thing to motivate, to define success. And so, Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit about kind of the 3 dimensions that are involved in all of this?
Yeah, there's leading committees, leading teams, leading projects, leading research, leading RFPs. There's so many different ways that we can lead. And in my situation, I'm leading groups of people. I'm leading them through a new initiative, and I'm leading them in an environment where I am unsure of the resources. And so I've really taken a step back, and I've decided everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. I've really humbled myself, and I've decided, okay, who cares how long I've been doing this? I want to be a follower for a while so that I can be a better leader. And so I've really tried to simplify my days, and I do have checklists and task lists and all of those other things. I also solicit feedback on a monthly basis from the folks in my department, the folks on our teams, the folks on my committee, the executive committee, even though I don't have any direct reports. And now I'm starting to solicit feedback from clients who we solicit feedback from, because I want to know, how am I doing in asking you how this firm is doing? And the clients have been thrilled with the opportunity to say, you're one of the few people from a law firm who have asked me questions and actually followed up on the things that you told me you were going to do. That has made me so much more confident in trying to sell this, as I said, in an environment where I'm not quite sure of all of the resources. And so I think, at least for me, it's about trust and respect and job satisfaction. I just presented to our BD department, as I mentioned, of 130, and they also pulled in our financial information and our library services group, so it's probably 250 people on the phone. I said, the first 10 people who IM me with what your idea of fun is in your job, I'll send you a book. I got 78 IMs. They had not ever thought of what's fun about our jobs. And so that's another element. I think it's another, at least for me, dimension, if there were a fourth one, of how to be a really good leader and a really good follower is try to have some enjoyment. And that effervescence and that intention is something that people will want to be close to what you're doing if they see that you have high satisfaction. And that's been the best lesson for me in my 14th year, is to just simplify and try to have some fun.
One of the things that I've learned probably more recently than I should have is that, well, I guess you forget that goals change. And when I talk to in-house counsel, doing client feedback interviews, et cetera, they always say, we hire the firm, we assign the task. This happens in your firms. You're in a marketing business. You have an objective. You're assigned that objective, and then the circumstances change. So remember, part of being a leadership and managing your career, your life, whatever the goal is, to keep going back and checking in with the people that you're working with.
Yeah, there was one more point I wanted to make to Jodi's, which I think is so fantastic, which is asking 3 or 4 people. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to have questions or a checklist. It's just a nice conversation, but you're asking for someone's impressions about how you're doing. And you get folks invested that way. So it doesn't have to be a formal feedback. So I think that's a bit intimidating for all of us. So that was another.
Somebody once mentioned to me that they were a mid-level person in their department. They said, one of the things that I do every once in a while is I ask my boss if I can take them out to coffee. The expectation is always it's on them to invite you out to an outside of the office setting to find out how things are going. But if you take ownership of that and invite them, then they are going to take you a little bit more seriously and say, that person really is interested. It's not an obligation. It's because they want to make sure that they're doing good. So, and good by us. We are in our waning moments. I do want to allow a few minutes for questions. So, but before that, Cherie, I'm curious. In your, how has this all evolved? Talk a few minutes about what you've seen and some of your observations in the evolution of leadership in our industry.
I wanted to first commend Jennifer. I have very sloppy notes, but the second to last word I wrote was fun. I think that good leaders are always a little bit fun. The leaders I work with have been fun, and I try to have fun when I'm leading people. I'll tell you, leadership is a personal thing. It's a personal perception. I don't really think of myself as a leader. I think of myself as someone who some people like to hang out with and follow. But the day that I took this job in 1991 was the scariest day of my career, not because I didn't know what I was doing, which, that I figured I'll just figure that part out. The idea of leading people, which I'd never really done before, I'd worked on teams, but I'd never been the person who was supposed to make the team operate. And I decided I would be a fun person for a while and stand back and observe and see what they did. And things changed. I think the lawyer's perception of non-lawyer leaders within the law firm has changed a lot over a period of time, and that in some ways is gratifying. I think lawyers have become better leaders just as they've become better business developers. I see change a lot of change, a huge amount of change in what seems like a long time, but in the greater scheme of things, it's probably a relatively, in law firm years, like dog years, it's a pretty short period of time to see that much evolution all at once.
So before I ask David to kind of give us a nice punctuation mark on the panel, I do want to give Jodi, Jennifer, Cherie, any other last bits of wisdom or closing comments before I ask Jodi?
I have just one thing, because I think it was probably, well, I certainly thought it was the best advice that I'd been given, and that is, like, when you're thinking about managing your people, the best thing to do is actually think about, of all the managers that you've had, what is it that they do that you really like? What is it that is, different, it could be the way that they talk to you, it could be the way that they're managing or how they're doing projects, but what is it that they do that, has you want to work for them? And we've all, throughout our careers experienced different managers, but if you think back to that, and then the idea is that do that with your people, because chances are they're going to like it as well.
I think that's such an important lesson. We sometimes forget to recognize the people that are really, really working hard to make us look good. So think about that in your day-to-day working life. Every time somebody does something that saves you, rescues you, puts you in a situation where you're getting the credit, just remember to say thanks, and that small gesture is incredibly powerful. So David, it's on you to close us out, to talk to us for a moment about those motivational tips and techniques that you have to be a better leader.
Well, and some of this is just some of the best practices that I've seen firms use. Let me just first go with this reward and thank people. I've seen a technique used in retreats that, of course, has a million different names, but I call it a success circle. And what's interesting is that you can get, and it's a nice little team building, the dinner the night before you're going to have a retreat if you have the right number of people. And the exercise is all about, you ask the participants to come up with at least one thing that somebody else in the organization did that was really helpful that might not have gotten recognized. And so, I'd really like to recognize Brad because Brad did this and it really helped my team and I really appreciate it. And you get a lot of that happening and it creates a great vibe, a great start. And when we're doing things like retreats and other things, there's reasons why we have these retreats. Sometimes things aren't great and we want to make things better. And so it's a nice way to set the stage. So there's that. In terms of places where leadership can take hold, where we can get some good tangible results, one of my favorite places is in doing some forms of a cross-selling type initiative. Because what's so good about cross-selling is that if you do cross-selling relatively well, it's going to trigger so many other things that we want to have happen in a firm. We're going to have to go out there and get feedback from our clients. So we're going to have to go and have some sort of a client feedback process. We probably need to track the feedback that we got from the clients to make sure we're acting on the feedback. We probably need to have our leaders leading better to be able to keep an eye on these behaviors. Maybe we need to put client service teams in place to act on what we learned. We're probably going to need to get our cross-practice groups together talking to each other more to do these things. I mean, there are so many things that it triggers that it's nice to do sort of the one big named thing that forces us to do a lot of other things. The other piece that I'll sort of close with is what I chatted about a little earlier, which is this idea of coming up with progress measures. Business development, we know, can take a really long time. And so we want to figure out a way that how can we give each other little pats on the back and pushes forward to keep them motivated so they know that this is really worthwhile. So we want to track things. I remember in a New York firm, they asked their partners to come up with their A list of clients and then to come up with a reason to be in touch with them at least once a month. Because we know, and I'm sure you've seen it, and your lawyers have seen it, what I call the by the way factor. You get a lawyer to call somebody, reach out, and what do? Oh, by the way, do you have anybody who could handle X? Well, let's get our people's asses in the right place, so this will happen. So we measure these things. Other things that you can measure. We've got things like, how many times are they making contact with the right people, the once a month? How big are the key networks that they have? So let's say you've got a corporate lawyer. They have accountants. They've got bankers. They've got CFOs. They've got other lawyers in the firm. These are their networks. Do they know one or two people in each bucket? Do they know 10, 20, or 50? So if we can get them focused on these lead indicators of success, grow your key networks. Those are important things. And just a few other things. How many referrals can they give? Because there's a human nature thing of, if you give a lot, you will receive. And this is especially important in cross-selling inside of a firm. Cross-selling is usually a take model. Hi, I'd really like to get work from your client. Instead of, wow, especially for new laterals. What a great thing for a new lateral. Hi, I'd like to introduce you. I'd like to introduce you to somebody. I'd like to introduce you to somebody. It creates a great set of activities. But we can measure these things, all the ingredients that go into the pipeline before it pours out in dollars and hours on the back end. So come up with the right strategic progress measures that will align with your goals that will get you to where you want to go. That in itself, you can hand that over to the leaders and then they can use their techniques of leadership to manage getting those things, the checklist things, done.
We are going to be extraordinarily disciplined today in keeping this show moving. So I am going to say congratulations to all of you in the audience for being here to take the time to invest in yourself, to understand what you need to do, what you can do, what the opportunities are for you to be the best as you possibly can be in your career, in your own development, to become the leader in your own right.